The lights in the television studio gleamed off the glass desk as Anderson Blake adjusted his tie. The veteran liberal host of the Blake Report smirked at the camera, his sharp eyes filled with their usual mix of amusement and derision. Tonight's guest was none other than Karoline Leavitt, the newly appointed White House press secretary under President Donald Trump. Karoline sat across from him, composed and poised as always, dressed in a crisp navy suit. Around her neck, a delicate gold cross shimmered beneath the spotlight, a subtle yet unmistakable statement of faith. She had faced hostile media before, but something about Blake's demeanor told her this interview would be a battle. "Karoline, welcome," Blake said, his voice dripping with politeness just thin enough to conceal his condescension. "Thank you for having me," Karoline replied with a firm nod. "So, let's dive in. The Trump administration, your boss, has been quite, let's say, controversial in its handling of policy matters. Many believe his rhetoric is divisive. As his press secretary, do you ever feel a moral dilemma defending some of these positions?" Karoline offered a knowing smile. She had prepared for this. "My job is to communicate the administration's positions clearly and truthfully. Americans deserve transparency, and that's exactly what I provide." Blake chuckled. "Transparency? Under Trump?" He waved his hand as if brushing away the notion. "That's an interesting choice of words. But let's put politics aside for a moment." He leaned forward, his gaze flickering toward the small gold cross resting on her collarbone. "I notice you're wearing a cross necklace," he said, his smirk widening. "That's quite the fashion statement for someone speaking on behalf of a president who, let's be honest, isn't exactly a saint." Karoline's fingers instinctively touched the cross. She had worn it for years, a gift from her grandmother before she passed, a symbol of faith, resilience, and family. Blake continued, his voice laced with mockery. "Do you think it's appropriate to mix religion and politics so openly? I mean, let's not forget this is 2025. Shouldn't we be past the whole wearing your faith on your sleeve thing?" The audience chuckled, a mix of loyal left-leaning viewers and social media-driven liberals who thrived on moments like this. Karoline, however, remained unshaken. She met his gaze with an unwavering confidence. "Faith isn't a trend, Anderson," she said calmly. "It's not a relic of the past. It's a foundation. And my faith is just as much a part of me as my commitment to serving the American people." Blake smirked. Sure. But don't you think that wearing a religious symbol in such a high-profile role sends the wrong message? I mean, we're a diverse nation. Some might see it as exclusionary." Karoline inhaled deeply. This wasn't just an attack on her jewelry, it was an attack on the very values she stood for. And so she responded. And what she said next would leave the entire studio stunned. A hush settled over the studio as the weight of Blake's words lingered in the air. Karoline Leavitt, however, remained unmoved. She had spent her career standing firm against media hostility, but this moment felt different, personal. Her fingers still rested on the cross at her collarbone as she spoke. "You ask if wearing a cross sends the wrong message," she began, her voice steady. "Let me ask you this, Anderson, why is it that expressions of faith are so often met with ridicule in today's America, but every other ideology, no matter how radical, is celebrated as progressive and brave?" Blake's smirk faltered slightly, but he quickly recovered. "Well, No, let's be honest here," Karoline interrupted, her tone sharpening. "Hollywood, the media, and many in the political establishment have no problem with people openly displaying their beliefs, so long as those beliefs align with a specific narrative. If someone wears a symbol supporting a left-wing cause, they're hailed as courageous. If a celebrity walks the red carpet in an outfit promoting a social justice movement, they're showered with praise. But the moment a Christian openly expresses their faith, suddenly it's offensive or inappropriate. Why is that, Anderson?" The audience murmured, a few shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Blake chuckled, but it was weaker this time. "Come on, Karoline. It's not about stifling faith. It's about recognizing that America is a melting pot. Wearing a cross in an official government role, it could be seen as a tacit endorsement of Christianity over other religions." Karoline's brow arched. "So, let me get this straight. You think wearing a small gold cross is problematic, but we've had government officials proudly draping themselves in flags of foreign nations, standing behind podiums adorned with ideological slogans, and even kneeling in symbolic protest during official duties. And none of that was seen as sending the wrong message." Blake opened his mouth, but Karoline continued, her voice rising slightly. "I wear this cross not as a political statement, but because my faith is a part of who I am. It guides my actions, my values, and my dedication to this country. It reminds me to serve with honesty, integrity, and humility, values that, quite frankly, are often lacking in Washington." A few audience members clapped. It was faint, hesitant, but it was there. Blake crossed his arms. Okay, but let's not pretend like this isn't also about politics. The Trump administration has courted the Christian vote for years. This is part of the branding, isn't it? Karoline let out a soft laugh. And what branding does your network push, Anderson? Because I think we both know that the so-called objective media gave up true neutrality a long time ago. You can mock my faith, you can mock my cross, but you won't shame me for standing firm in my beliefs. If anything, moments like this only prove why I and millions of Americans refuse to back down. The tension in the room was thick. Even Blake, usually so quick with a snide remark, hesitated. And then, to everyone's surprise, he pivoted. All right, he said, waving his hands as if to dismiss the topic. Let's move on. But the damage was done. By the time the segment ended, social media was already ablaze. And Karoline had no idea just how explosive the fallout would be. The moment the interview ended, Karoline knew she had struck a nerve. The usual media circus that followed White House briefings was nothing compared to the storm that awaited her after the Blake report aired. Within minutes, her phone buzzed incessantly. Messages poured in, some from allies cheering her on, others from reporters hungry for a reaction. But the real battlefield was online. On X, formerly Twitter, the clip of her exchange with Anderson Blake had already racked up millions of views. The hashtags #Crossgate, #CarolineClapsback, and #BlakeExposed trended within the hour. The responses were exactly what she expected, split right down America's ideological fault line. Red Circle conservatives rallied behind her. Prominent voices praised her courage. Loudspeaker Tucker Carlson, now independent Karoline Leavitt, stood her ground against yet another smug liberal who thinks faith is a joke. She's exactly what this administration needs. Loudspeaker Senator Josh Hawley, why is a Christian woman mocked for wearing a cross, but no one dares question radical activists draping themselves in symbols of their own causes? The double standard is sickening. Blue Circle the left, meanwhile, was enraged. Liberal commentators accused her of playing the Christian victim card and stoking division. Loudspeaker MSNBC's Rachel Maddow, it's 2025 and somehow we're still debating whether people in government should be using their faith to signal their politics. Leavitt knew what she was doing, this is calculated. Loudspeaker late-night host Stephen Colbert, imagine working for Donald Trump and thinking you're the persecuted one. Karoline, please. Even Anderson Blake himself took to X, posting a smug caption alongside a clip of their exchange. Loudspeaker at Anderson Blake TV, triggered much? If you're in politics, maybe grow thicker skin. #Crossgate. But what none of them expected was how middle America, the silent majority, would react. While media elites scoffed, everyday Americans saw something different. By morning, conservative churches, pastors, and influencers across the country were sharing messages of support for Karoline. Many wore crosses in solidarity, posting photos with the hashtag #WeWearTheCross. Fox News invited her for a follow-up interview. Newsmax and One America News ran special segments analyzing the exchange. Even independent podcasters like Joe Rogan debated whether mainstream media's hostility toward religion was pushing Americans further to the right. But the biggest shock came from an unlikely source. In a rare moment of bipartisanship, even some moderate Democrats pushed back against Blake's remarks. Loudspeaker Tulsi Gabbard, independent, I don't agree with Karoline Leavitt on everything, but religious freedom is a cornerstone of America. Mocking someone's faith for political points? Not a good look. Loudspeaker Bill Maher, HBO's Real Time, I'm an atheist, but this obsession with shaming Christians is ridiculous. People wear religious symbols all the time, big deal. Stop being so fragile. For once, the usual political battle lines weren't so clear. And as Karoline walked into the White House the next day, she realized something. She hadn't just defended herself in that interview. She had started a movement. And the backlash was just getting started. The next morning, the atmosphere inside the White House press office was charged. Karoline Leavitt walked in, her phone still buzzing with messages as staffers whispered about the firestorm ignited by her interview. She was met immediately by Chief of Staff Stephen Miller, who grinned as he held up his phone. Karoline, I hope you realize you just became the biggest news story in America. She smirked. I noticed. Miller chuckled. The president wants to see you. Now. When she entered the Oval Office, President Donald Trump was seated behind the Resolute desk, watching a replay of her interview on one of the multiple televisions lining the walls. He looked up and grinned. Karoline, that was perfect. She smiled but remained professional. Thank you, Mr. President. Trump gestured toward the screen. Blake looked like a total fool. You handled it better than anyone could have. And you know what? I think we use this. Big time. Vice President J.D. Vance, who had been standing nearby, nodded. The backlash is proving what we've been saying for years. Americans are sick of being told their faith is offensive. The left just played right into our hands. Karoline shifted slightly. She had defended herself on principle, not as a political strategy, but she wasn't naive. She knew the White House would seize the opportunity. Trump leaned forward. I want you to hold your ground. We're not apologizing. We're not backing down. In fact, we're doubling down. He handed her a piece of paper. We're setting up a press conference for you this afternoon. You're going to address this head-on. Karoline scanned the outline. It was a bold move, positioning this as a moment not just about her, but about the broader war on religious expression. She took a deep breath. I'll be ready, she said. Trump grinned. I know you will. By 2 p.m., the White House briefing room was packed. Reporters jostled for position, cameras flashing. The tension was palpable. Karoline stepped to the podium, her gold cross still proudly displayed. Good afternoon, she began, scanning the room. Over the last 24 hours, I've been inundated with questions, criticism, and most importantly, an overwhelming amount of support from the American people. So let me be clear. I will not apologize for my faith. Reporters scribbled furiously. I wear this cross not to exclude anyone, but because it represents who I am. And the idea that a government official cannot openly express their religious beliefs is fundamentally un-American. She took a deep breath and continued. This is not about me. This is about the millions of Americans who feel silenced, mocked, or pressured to hide their faith in public spaces. It's about the growing hostility toward Christianity in particular, while other ideological expressions are encouraged and celebrated. A CNN reporter shot up. Are you suggesting that Christians are oppressed in America? Karoline's expression was firm. I'm suggesting that if a Muslim staffer wore a hijab or a Jewish staffer wore a yarmulke, there wouldn't be a single news segment questioning whether that was appropriate. But when a Christian wears a simple cross, it becomes a national controversy. Why? The room fell silent. Another reporter from NBC tried to shift the narrative. But don't you think, given the separation of church and state, that religious symbols in official roles can be problematic? Karoline smiled. Separation of church and state means the government cannot force a religion on the people. It does not mean that individuals in government must abandon their personal faith. That's a deliberate misinterpretation of the Constitution. The murmurs in the room grew louder. Karoline knew she had them cornered. I will continue to wear my cross, she concluded. Because faith is not a political prop. It is my right as an American. The room erupted in shouting. Reporters hurled follow-up questions, but Karoline simply stepped away from the podium. She had said what needed to be said, and the battle was only beginning. As Karoline